David has never been married. He always loved and valued his freedom and didn't want to change it for family relationships. There were a lot of negative examples around, and David didn't want to join the ranks of deceived or divorced men. Everything suited him in life that he created for himself. David was wealthy and independent, and that was what he valued the most. Of course, some of his friends were married and seemed to be happy, but they were bound by family ties and burdened with children who constantly cried, begged for something, and were sick. And according to David, they really interfered with a normal adult life. David had many women. He stopped remembering their names by the age of 30. He did not meet with anyone for a long time, preferring light and unencumbered romances. David had another passion, namely mountains. He spent every vacation where he could only get on foot and with a backpack. He conquered many peaks and dreamed of one day settling near the highlands. A few years ago, he had a fantastic ascent to one of the peaks of the mountain range, and he lived long memories of those weeks that he had spent away from civilization. Their team included a young climber named Linda. She is just as restless as he is. She and David were always there. Many times, they extended a helping hand to each other. They talked and spent time as if they had known each other for many years. David broke his cardinal rule for this girl. He exchanged addresses and phone numbers with her, but he never called her. And when he returned home, he regretted this moment of weakness. But he was so fascinated by his girlfriend, so enjoyed her sincerity and childish spontaneity, that he couldn't resist the temptation. On the last joint evening, he arranged for her a romantic date away from prying eyes. He spoke words of love to her, made promises to her, and achieved what he so wanted. In the morning, quiet and unusually calm, Linda said goodbye to him, and they parted, never to see each other again. The first months, David missed the girl. He even wanted to call her, but he did not find the piece of paper on which her number was written down. And the guy began to forget her. Then he began to appear other girls, and soon he completely forgot Linda. 5 years later, once David was returning home and saw a young woman of 25 years old sitting on a bench near his entrance. She held a little boy in her arms and lulled him, whispering something in his ear. The boy was crying and shivering from the cold. A large bag stood next to them. David passed by, looking in surprise at this strange couple. It was already getting dark. It was starting to rain, and they were sitting and not going to leave. David went into his house, turned on the kettle, and then looked out the window and saw that the girl was still sitting in that place. And then he sighed nervously and went down the stairs. He approached the girl and said to the girl, "Are you crazy? You are sitting here with your child at this hour. Can't you see that it's starting to rain?" The girl answered in a quiet and very tired voice, "I see, but we have nowhere to go. I called a taxi and now we will go to the station." The guy asked her again, "Will you go to the station to spend the night?" The girl replied, "Yes, hotels are very expensive." David commanded, "Okay, get up. Today you will stay with me, and then we'll figure it out." David picked up the bag, which was surprisingly light. Apparently, only clothes were in it. And he confidently stepped into the entrance. Then he turned around. "Where are you sitting? Are you waiting for the rain?" The woman stood up, picked up the child, and followed the guy. Later, when little Paul was bathed, fed, and put to a bed, a girl named Laika told how she got into this situation. "Paul's father lives in your house. He turned out to not be a very decent person. He didn't want to know anything about his son and quickly drove us away. Paul has a problem with his legs. He needs a surgery. When we know that our turn had come, we came here. We wanted to ask Paul's father for help, but he kicked us out into the street, not even caring about where we would spend the night. In addition, he was married and had 2 daughters. They and his wife were not at home, so he kicked us out quickly so we wouldn't accidentally run into them." "What a scoundrel. How can you be so shameless? Do you want me to talk to him?" The girl said, "No, I will not go to him again, because I never ask twice. Don't you worry, we'll leave tomorrow." David carefully looked at the girl, and it seemed to him that he had already seen her somewhere, but he couldn't remember. Laika lay down with Paul on the sofa in the living room, and David laid down in his room. He barely slept for a couple of hours when he was awakened by an anxious girl and asked him to call emergency medical help because the child had a high temperature. The rest of the night passed restlessly, calling for medical help, examining the boy, a trip to the 24-hour pharmacy. Everything calmed down by 7 o'clock in the morning. A couple of hours of restless sleep brought no rest, and David woke up sullen and broken, but he saw the joyful Leica's face. She said that Paul felt better and fell asleep. When the girl invited him to breakfast, David was surprised that he had managed to cook him amazingly delicious pancakes, which the guy had never eaten. David's sullenness and fatigue vanished. David enjoyed breakfast and left for work, after telling Leica that they should stay here today. He can't kick a sick child out into the street. Leica apologized a lot for the inconvenience caused and asked permission to cook dinner for him. David, of course, allowed. David has been thinking about that strange event all day at work. Of course, Leica and her son violated the usual order of his life, but for some reason he was not angry with them, and he flattered himself, realizing that they would have had a bad time without him. He believed that he acted nobly, unlike the boy's father, who kicked them out onto the street in the middle of the night. At the end of the working day, colleagues began to persuade David to go with him after work to the country house for the whole weekend. There, they were going to organize a small party. David initially refused under the pretext that he had guests at home and he needed to be with them. But in the end, he agreed to go with friends. He called home and told Leica, who didn't immediately answer, that he would not come today, but only tomorrow. Leica sadly looked at the prepared dinner and the served table, and then cleaned everything and went to Paul. But David didn't come on Saturday or Sunday. On Monday morning, Leica called a taxi, called the neighboring apartment, and asked the woman who looked out to give David the keys to the apartment and thanks for the hospitality, and then she and her son left. David returned home only 2 days later and found that the girl and the child had left, leaving the keys to the apartment to a neighbor. The apartment was in perfect order. There was a lot of delicious food prepared by Leica in the refrigerator. The beds were neatly made, and on the bedside table there was a forgotten book with fairy tales that Leica read to Paul. For several days, David called all the hospitals. He was looking for the boy Paul and his mother Leica, but no one could tell him anything intelligible. The guy lost his appetite and sleep. He himself couldn't understand what was happening to him. He practically didn't know these people, but why did they sink into his soul so much? Why is he so worried? David didn't know this. And then, David remembered that Leica said that Paul had problems with his legs. He immediately began calling all the institutions where they can perform surgeries on children's legs, but he couldn't find anything specific, so he decided to go himself to a large hospital center. When David went around all the floors and offices, he ran into a tearful Leica. The guy screamed, "Leica, what's up with Paul?" The crying girl said, "They refuse him. Our turn was for surgery, and now they put another child in our place. He's in a more difficult situation." David suggested, "So you'll be next." Leica wept bitterly. "No, the government program is a long time to wait. We were like state employees. Paul was put on the waiting list. Now I don't have that kind of money." At this time, the doctor looked out the office and asked the girl to come to him. But David entered the office himself. He stayed there for about 20 minutes. Then he went out and told Leica to go to Paul and not worry about anything. Everything will be fine. David's friends were surprised to learn that he was selling his car. After all, he just bought it. And now the brand new car was on sale, and soon David had a large amount of money on his hands. And after 3 days, Paul underwent the necessary operation. Leica didn't leave the boy a single step. One day, when Paul was sleeping, David came to their hospital room. He quietly said, "I brought your book of fairy tales." Leica said, "Thank you. Did you pay for everything? I don't know how to repay your debt. Do you want us to draw up a contract or a receipt? I will start paying immediately when I get back to work." David replied, "No receipts needed. Promise me just one thing. Give me your pancakes again when this is over." Leica smiled shyly. She fiddled with the book in her hands, and a postcard with a photo of snow-capped mountains fell out. David reached out and looked at the photo. "Are those mountains? But I was here a few years ago." He turned the card over, on the back of which was written an address in beautiful handwriting. It was his address and old phone number, but the apartment was listed incorrectly. At the top, Davy was written in sweeping handwriting. The man thought, he didn't understand why it was written Davy, and suddenly He remembered that only that girl in the mountains, Linda, called him that. She then stated that the name David is associated with her stepfather, who was also called that and who hated her. So she started calling him Davy. But David couldn't understand what Leica and her son had to do with it. David asked Leica, "Where did you get this from?" "This is the address of that man, Paul's father. I'm not Paul's birth mother. He is the son of my late sister Linda. She met this David while climbing a mountain. She was an avid climber. When Linda returned from a hike, she realized that she was pregnant. She waited a long time for him to call her or come to her. She herself tried to call David, but his number was unavailable, and she realized that he didn't need her. Then, our mother died, and we stayed with our stepfather. By the way, his name is the same as yours. He constantly mocked me and my sister, called us names, reproached her for getting pregnant. Linda died in childbirth, but Paul survived. But he needed treatment. I spent a lot of time with him in hospitals. I took care of him the best I could. I was putting him on the waiting list for surgery." David listened to Leica and felt an unpleasant chill filling him. He understood everything now. And the girl continued, not noticing what was happening to him. "Once, we returned home after another examination, and the stepfather kicked us out into the streets and didn't even allow us to spend the night. He brought a woman to him, and he didn't need us. But I already had a referral to the hospital in my hands, and I decided to go here. I found this postcard with the address of Paul's father in Linda's old scrapbook, and I thought he might be able to help us. But I was wrong, and if not for you." "I'm Paul's father. I was with Linda at the time." And David told all about that trip to the mountains. He added that Linda must have mixed up the apartment number, and he broke that phone, after which he bought a new phone along with a SIM card. Leica gasped in amazement. She was silent for a long time and then suddenly laughed nervously. "Who do I go to then? My God, what a coincidence that the man's name is also Davy. Good thing his wife wasn't at home. Forgive me, we won't bother you anymore. When we are discharged from here, we will leave." "No, Leica, I won't let you go anywhere now. Paul is my son. I've already missed so much time." Several years have passed. David and Leica were married and have a little daughter. Paul moved to the 2nd grade and enjoyed playing with his sister. And David was very happy to have a family, and he looked at unmarried friends with pity. He sincerely wished them that they would meet their love.